My name is Bradford Katy, and I am your host. We are so excited to bring you this project from the minds behind Ramos Law. But before I go any further, let me introduce you the man whose unique perspective we'll be facilitating today, Dr. Joseph Ramos. Dr. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited. First show.
It's incredible. I'm super excited for this. Tell me, how does it feel to be behind the microphone, the proverbial captain of the ship on its maiden voyage?
I know, right? I've always dreamed of having, my own podcast that we put out there, and we're doing it. So it feels great.
I've always dreamed of hosting one. So this is perfect. This is
Sweet.
perfect. My understanding, before we go any further, is that you are a medical doctor and a licensed attorney,
Yes.
husband,
Yes.
pilot, father, black belt, champion trap shooter, and a little birdie told me that you finished second in the audition for the Dos Equis Most Interesting Man in the World.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. Well, all true except for the last part
Sure.
about Dos Equis, although I like that. And of all of those various things, the most important thing is being a husband and a father.
I believe it. Well, what we want to do in this show is provide our audience with a little 20-minute conversation where we can find something that's entertainingly intriguing. There's a lot that lives at the intersection between medicine and law.
Yes.
And so what I want to do each one of these episodes is find something that's in that zip code, right? And get your medical expertise and legal knowledge and see what we can learn.
That's awesome, because that's why I love coming to work every day. It's exactly that intersection you're talking about. So we're going to have some great conversations.
And you've got a lot of expertise for us to draw on. So before I get distracted on what could be innumerable different numbers of subjects, I want to identify your perspective better, right? Okay. So you're the resident expert here. You're the one whose list of accolades I just went through. I think that a great idea for us for these first couple episodes, and especially on this one, an episode of beginnings, is I want the doctor-lawyer breakdown to be a breakdown of you.
Oh,
right?
Great.
So now it's a long list, right?
Yeah, it's a long list, I guess.
I don't think we're going to be able to fit all that in 20 minutes.
You're right.
So the way that I've got it structured for today is I want to focus on the Dr. Joseph Ramos origin story for episode 1, right?
Super.
New podcast, new beginnings.
Yes.
Let's talk about you and where you grew up, your family, etc. And then let's, in the next episode, get into a little bit more detail about what you learned, school. I mean, and that is a ton. I have to think, going through that list, you've got more years of school than I have letters in my name. Like that is a lot of work. There's no way we're going to cover it in 20 minutes.
People always ask, how many years did you go to school? So I'm glad we're putting that off into episode 2 so I can, in the meantime, in an intermission or something, count up those years, because it's quite a few years.
I believe it. Yeah. So let's focus on, for episode 1, the origin story.
Awesome.
The first question I want to ask you is, where were you born? But I want to be a little more specific. 2 sides of that. The first one is, give me the physical location, right? The kind of question you would expect someone to ask you. But also, I'm interested in birth order. I'm a firstborn myself. So tell me a little bit more about not only where you were born, but where in the order, if you've got any siblings.
Yeah, super. So I was born in Reno, Nevada, but that's not where I lived. I actually lived 176 miles, to be exact, from Reno, in a little bitty town called Austin, Nevada. But Austin is small, 150 people. There wasn't even a grocery store.
Wow.
There. And so obviously there were no doctors there, and there was no hospital there. So my parents went away to Reno. That's where I was born at. And I was the firstborn, so I'm also the oldest. Yeah, we have something in common
let's
there.
go.
Yes,
I like it.
I'm the oldest of 8.
Okay.
So I have 4 sisters and 3 brothers and myself. So 8 of us total.
When you say you lived, what was it? I think you had an exact number, 176 miles from
Yes,
Reno.
yes.
So like, describe to me the neighborhood, like I'm walking down the street, what's your house look like? What you got in the front yard? What's not in the front yard? Like, take me down memory lane a little bit here, Dr. Ramos.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll give you a little background on that memory, so then you'll understand where I lived and why. So when I was initially born, we lived on a ranch outside of town, 26 miles outside of this little town. And my dad lived with his parents. My dad is the youngest of 12.
Wow.
And my mother got pregnant at age 16. My dad was just turning 18, so that didn't go over very well.
I believe it.
And so they lived on the ranch with my grandparents.
Okay.
26 miles out of town. Well, it wasn't until later. Maybe I was 5 years old or so, roughly. We moved into town.
Okay, so hold on, I'm going to pause you. At 5 years old, you said you have 7 siblings?
Yes.
All younger. So at 5, how many siblings do you have at this point?
So at that point, there were 2 because we're each 3 years apart.
Okay.
And so I'm actually closer in age to my father, 18 years apart, than I am to my youngest sibling, who I'm like 21 years apart from.
I was just doing the math in my head. I'm not so great at it, but I was guessing that's about 20 years between the oldest and the youngest. Okay. So, but back to the story. You're about 5. Yep. You've got 2 younger siblings. Brothers, sisters, combination?
Yes, yep. So at that time, all the first initial ones were sisters. So it's Joey, Jenny, Jackie, Jody. They have a bunch of J's.
Oh, no.
Yeah, before they start changing from the J's. But anyway.
Gotcha. Okay, so but at 5 years old, the family is moving off of the ranch to
Austin, Nevada, a little bitty town. Yeah.
What are some of your fond memories of that time frame and that town 176 miles out of Reno?
Well, so the cool thing about Austin, being as small as it was, dirt roads. So dirt roads everywhere, no stoplights. I lived in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, double-wide trailer. Later, when I was about out of high school, I think they upgraded to a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, for all of us to pile in like puppies. But some of my fondest memories are like, so because we all stayed in the same room all the time, I remember initially with my sister, who I'm closest to, Jennifer, the one right underneath me, I had the upper bunk and she had the lower bunk. And I would go to climb up my bunk and she would like grab my toes. And so my siblings later made fun of me saying my big toe is really big. And I said, that's because my sister was grabbing it every time I'm pulling out.
Oh my gosh.
To get up in my bed.
I had bunk beds with my next youngest sibling, and I know there's all kinds of shenanigans you can get up to, and there's a set of those in the house.
Yes.
Awesome. So you start going to school in Reno, Nevada. Now
that was college. That was later.
Later. Austin.
Childhood stuff. Yeah, Austin.
Okay, so we start going to primary school, middle school in Austin. Now, obviously, I'm going to keep referencing this list of accomplishments, both educational and or otherwise. And obviously, that's a big deal to get through that much college and that much after continued education. But that has to start somewhere. So, what are some of the things, do you remember when some of these seeds of interest got planted? Is it around this time when you're living in Austin with your large family?
Well, as I look back, I can see where there were certainly connections eventually, but it takes looking back, and it wasn't at that time. So the school that I went to had 54 kids in 9th through 12th grade.
Wow.
All together. All 12 grades were in the same building. So kindergarten through 12th grade were in the same building.
Holy cow.
9 through 12 was about 54 kids. There was probably similar to that in elementary. But as I look back now, for example, in going into medicine later in my life, one of the things I always heavily respected growing up was that there were no doctors. So I had a couple brothers and sisters who had asthma, and I remember my parents walking them around at night because out in the cold air, it would help with the airway constriction. And I can remember that, if something had gone wrong, we'd have been in real trouble.
Wow.
There was no doctor out there to help. And so I really had this respect of medicine all along because we didn't have it.
Yeah.
And, as I look back, that probably drove a lot later of my decisions.
So do you remember anything happening in the family where it was like, I grew up with 3 younger siblings. We're all within 5 years of each other. We're constantly beating each other up. I just mentioned the thing about the bunk beds. I couldn't tell you how many times I fell off the darn things.
Yes.
But, we had a few broken bones and a few incidents, Was there ever an incident in your family where you're like, hey, we got to pack so-and-so up in the car and drive them however many miles to the hospital?
Yeah, there were a lot of incidents like that. I remember, and my mom tells these stories all the time. There was one time where one of my sisters was backing up and the lid to the dishwasher was down and she fell over it and a knife was sticking up.
Oh my gosh.
And the knife went up into her leg. Whew. And she freaked out and I grabbed her, pulled her up, put something on her bleeding leg. There's a little fat protruding out, kind of pushed it in. And my mom was like, man, you were always going to be doctor. I just knew it from that moment.
See, I knew we'd get to a story like this. Here we are. How old were you at the time?
Gosh, when that happened, I was probably 12.
Okay.
I remember another time, one of my rabbits had a wound on its head full of blood. Oof. And I drained that from the rabbit. My mom was like, man, I can't believe you just drained. I was like, yeah, But we grew up out there butchering our own animals. We had our own chickens. We had our own sheep and pigs and cattle. And, we lived that way. So I was never like grossed out by blood or That's probably why I went into trauma.
Yeah.
You know, to me, it was just natural. It was just a person.
Well, I mean, if you did your first procedure at 12 on the door of the dishwasher, yeah. So by the time you are probably almost finished with high school, all of your siblings are born and the families and mom, dad are done having kids,
Yeah,
right?
Mom was pregnant with, I think, the last one about the time I was getting ready to graduate and move on, yeah.
Okay, so you went to high school in Austin, Nevada as well.
Yes.
Okay, so how'd you feel about high school? The firstborn, I know that I was a very studious individual as the firstborn. I don't know if it's a firstborn thing,
Yes.
but like good grades were important to me.
Yes.
How did that go over in high school for you?
Yeah, you know, so my parents were never on me for grades. I just did it because I'm competitive. And so I always been intrigued by reading and stuff like that, and just learning.
Yeah.
And the other unique thing was we really didn't have organized television until I was probably in early high school. We had like an antenna up until then you would turn the guy to get TV. So I never really watched TV. So if you're not watching TV, either playing sports or you're reading or studying. And so, you know, going to high school was nice. I played all the sports. There were only 3: cross country, track, and basketball.
Okay.
And there was no football. We didn't have people. We didn't have a field.
Wow.
Anyway, no baseball, same thing.
Huh.
But that also was a start of good study habits because I worked hard. I didn't like to lose. So I studied hard and I did well in school. And that actually paid off later, which when we get into the college stuff, I'll tell you about the U.S. Air Force Academy. And
I can't wait. I can't wait. Okay, so you're in high school. You're playing basketball all 4 years?
Yes.
Okay. When you start to discover that you've got that competitive drive and you know that you're like, you don't like to lose. I love that, right? It's not that I need to win every time. I just don't like to lose, right?
Yeah.
And you start to discover that. Where do you get this, like, or do you remember a time where you got this spark for like, man, I have to go, I'm hungry for more knowledge. Where can I find this? Because I'm guessing if there's no hospital, I mean, there probably wasn't a very big library, right?
No,
and if you're not watching TV and Google's not around yet,
No internet back then.
where are you going to like feed that hunger for knowledge, you know, in junior, senior year of high school?
Yeah, so I read a ton of books always. I just always was a reader. And I still am. I still wake up every morning, read for an hour, hour and a half every morning. It's just something I do. I enjoy. I like, you know, I like learning new things. And so I did beat the library up a lot.
I bet.
And I dug deep on things. I remember in my high school history class, they asked us to write a paper on somebody from history that we liked. And I wrote a paper on Chief Joseph. It was an Indian chief who was, you know, famous in the early American Indian time period here in the U.S. And my paper was like 26 pages. And I remember the history teacher being like, dude, like, you know, 26 pages.
26 pages.
I was so into writing about his history and where he went and different battles and how he moved the people, you know, from one state to another and so on and so forth. I couldn't stop writing. And just not stop writing. Of course, I just not stop reading. And I would go to a different source to find out more about him. It was just, you know, I was always that way.
So when you're pulling all this knowledge in, right? You're draining the library of as many books as possible, right? Hopefully returning them on time.
Yes.
So when did you realize like, hey, I want to go to college. I want to do something more than, you know, what's in my immediate surroundings. Like where did you start to look, and like, is there an incident that sparked it, or is it more of just kind of like, hey, I've always felt this way?
Again, my parents didn't push education much, so it didn't come from there. It wasn't that they were against it by any means.
Of course.
They just didn't do it themselves. They, you know, did high school, and that was good enough, which is, you know, it was good. It was good that there wasn't that type of pressure, but at the same time, I always wanted more. And as I started going through high school and started maturing a little bit more, I started kind of having dreams of things I wanted to do. And, you know, that started with wanting to fly a jet airplane. And so then I started reading a lot about airplanes. And as I read about airplanes, I learned about the United States Air Force Academy and fighter pilots and, you know, Top Gun and from the Naval Academy and so on and so forth. And so that curiosity about different things led me to then read and study, which then prompted me to say, hey, I got to get out of this town to go do that. And that's kind of how it evolved for me. And the other thing I would tell you that was a real advantage, and it goes to the small town part of my story, is that when you're in a small town, you grow up early. And the reason you do is it's like having 100 more parents. Everybody knows everybody.
Yep.
And when you talk to people, you look them in the eye. And if you're not looking them in the eye, they tell you, hey, look me in the eye. They're not even your parent, right? People expect respect. People, if they need a hand with something, they don't expect you to offer. If you're young and you don't realize when to chip in, they say, hey, man, grab the end of that.
Yep.
So I grew up around adults.
Uh-huh.
And I grew up acting like an adult and interacting with adults. And that naturally also spurs intellectual curiosity. Because one person might be a welder, or one person might work in a gold mine, or one person might do something else. And so then you're asking them questions about that. And I think that also pushes you, at least it did for me, to want to learn.
Do you remember if there was a specific story or book or commentary that you read that said, okay, I made my decision. I'm going to go to the next, and we'll do a little preview spoiler for next episode, because we are going to get into the academy and your desire to fly. But like, do you remember if there was like a flashbulb moment where you're like, yep, that's what I'm doing?
Yeah, there was. Interesting enough, I know that a lot of what we're going to talk about and what the show is based on is law and medicine.
Right.
Early on, there was no law or medicine in my thoughts.
I was about to mention that. I was saying I haven't heard anything about wanting to be a lawyer so far.
No, and there never was, all the way up actually through being a doctor. Again, we'll get into that.
All right.
Years after being a doctor, in fact. The thought of the doctor thing, as I told you, was only after I looked back and realized how much I respected doctors. Even then, at the time, doctor didn't cross my mind. In fact, I wanted to be a dentist when I left the Air Force Academy and came back, but I'm jumping ahead. The aha moment for me of where I'm going next, which led to the United States Air Force Academy, was in our town. So there's this town 112 miles from us, Fallon, Nevada.
Fallon, Nevada.
Okay. There's a Fallon Naval Air Base there. And all the Top Gun pilots fly out of there. Well, they would fly out of Fallon and out to get to where we were. There was nothing. It was, Time magazine called it the loneliest road in America. Because if you didn't get gas in Fallon, you better hope you can go 112 miles. You're going to get gas again. That's where I was at. So what happens, these pilots would leave the Fallon Naval Air Base and they would fly down across this valley. My town was up in this little mountain, beautiful setting, climbs up to about 7,000 feet. It's in a canyon. It's absolutely gorgeous. These fighter pilots would go there and they'd race up this canyon. And occasionally they would get so much acceleration as they go up the canyon to get a sonic boom. It would blow the windows out of the businesses.
Wow.
And so, or crack them at least. So I remember Carol's store across from us, Carol Givens had this restaurant across the street from us. And I remember this one time that it went through and it cracked all of her windows with a sonic boom. Now, they were really good about it. They would call there and the Navy would come out and replace them. And nobody in the town.
That's good.
Nobody in the town really bitched because we all liked seeing these airplanes.
Yeah, I bet that was awesome.
But I remember seeing that probably about, sophomore year of high school. I said, man, I want to be in that airplane.
That was it.
That's what I want to do.
I mean, it's tough to look at that and not want to be a part of it. Yeah, that's awesome.
Which eventually led to one of my biggest failures, I'm sure we'll get to in the future, one of my feelings of failure. I put all my eggs in I'm going to be a Top Gun pilot basket. I'm going to be a fighter pilot in our U.S. military. I put all my eggs in that basket. And when that didn't mature for me, that was one of my first setbacks in life. And so I'm sure we'll talk about that in another episode.
Well, and I am excited to cover that in the next episode. We're getting right up to our time limit for today's show.
Yes.
But that's a great teaser for the next one. So we'll get into that in the Air Force Academy and kind of what happened after you graduated high school. And when you obviously you've decided what you want to do. So then we're going to learn about how you did it next. But I want to wrap up our first show with a little idea I had for some engagement from you, the audience, but as well as get to know you a little bit more on kind of an unrelated subject matter, right? Yep. So I asked you to prepare before this. I want you to give us a multiple choice question or multiple answers to the question, what was your dream car at age 19? And we'll see if we can't get a little bit of the audience. Take a guess. I'm going to guess here on the show as well. And then to open the show, the next episode, we'll start off with this little tidbit.
Okay, fantastic. So my dream car at age 19, was it a Chevy truck, box truck, about the 1970 version, that's on bigger tires and they look pretty fancy.
Okay.
Nowadays we call them a classic. Those days I would call them.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it was the 1970s Chevy box truck, big tires. Okay.
Was it, that's A.
Okay.
Was it B, a 69 Chevy Camaro?
Muscle car. Classic.
Classic muscle car.
Okay.
Or was it C, a 1980 Corvette, 7980, right in that time for Corvette, red, convertible top that came off, didn't roll back, just came off. Which of those was it? The Chevy truck, the Camaro, or the Corvette?
The Corvette. Well, this is good. Okay, so I mean, I'm thinking, you know, big family, working family, dirt roads. My first thought is, well, the most utilitarian thing you'd want to use the whole time would be the truck. But I'm guessing with the kind of contrast that, you know, you might end up wanting to drive something a little bit more city friendly. So I'm gonna guess C, the Corvette.
Okay.
But folks, if you're listening in and you want to give us a guess, throw your guess in the comments. We'll cover this on our next episode. But Dr. Ramos, this has been great. I love learning about this and you, and I think this is going to be an awesome endeavor. It's going to be super fun to get you to ask you all these questions, pick your brain about interesting subject matter. But that's going to do it for episode 1. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. It's been a great time.
And thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.